I used to take babysitting jobs to earn some extra money. Nothing too complicated. A few hours watching over kids while their parents went out, usually for dinners or events. One winter night, I received a message from a family who lived in an isolated house on the outskirts of town. They said they needed someone urgently because their commitment couldn't be postponed. Since the payment was good, I accepted. I arrived around 7 p.m. when the snow had already covered everything around. The house was large, with old windows and a garden that, in the darkness, looked more like a forest. Mr. and Mrs. Clark welcomed me at the door. They were friendly, but there was something in their eyes that made me uneasy. Mrs. Clark grabbed my arm before leaving and said, "You don't need to go upstairs unless the children need something. They sleep soundly." I thought it was strange, but I didn't question it. The children, Ellie and Tim, were adorable. I put them to bed around 8 p.m., and everything seemed calm. I went downstairs to the living room, settled on the couch, and began watching TV. The snow outside muffled all sounds, and the silence inside the house was almost absolute. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was my imagination. The sound came from upstairs, a slow and deliberate rhythm, as if someone were walking down the hallway. I remembered Mrs. Clark's words. They sleep soundly, but maybe one of the children had gotten up to go to the bathroom? I carefully went upstairs, trying not to alarm them. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the faint light coming from Ellie's room. I went to her room, but she was lying down, breathing peacefully. Tim was also asleep, wrapped in his blanket. I checked both rooms and the bathroom, but there was no one else there. I went back downstairs, trying not to think too much about the sound. It must have been the wind, I told myself. The house was old. Maybe creaking was common. I sat back on the couch and tried to focus on the TV, but then something icy ran down my spine. Footprints. There were wet snow footprints on the floor of the living room. They came from the front door, crossed the entrance, and ended right in the hallway, exactly where I had been sitting before going upstairs. My heart raced. I jumped up and rushed to check the door, but it was locked, with the security chain in place. There was no sign it had been opened. The footprints were impossible. I tried to calm myself. Maybe I had been so distracted I hadn't noticed them earlier? Maybe it was snow I had brought in when I arrived? But that didn't make sense. The footprints were large, much bigger than my feet, and they came from outside. Suddenly, I heard a sound that froze me in place. It wasn't footsteps this time, but a low laugh, almost imperceptible, coming from above. I looked at the stairs. The hallway was dark, but the faint light from Ellie's room still shone. I slowly climbed the stairs, my heart pounding. When I reached the top, I noticed something that made me stop. Tim's room door was slightly ajar. I was sure I had closed it before. I pushed the door with my trembling hand and looked inside. Tim was in bed, but something was wrong. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the ceiling. He seemed paralyzed, but his mouth moved slightly, as if trying to say something. I approached slowly and heard him whisper, "He's behind you." I turned so quickly I almost lost my balance, but the hallway was empty. But now, the light from Ellie's room was off. I ran to it, panic consuming me. When I opened the door, it was empty. The window was open, and snowflakes were coming in, forming a small puddle on the floor. I ran down the stairs, desperate, ready to call the police, but my phone was dead. The house's landline didn't seem to work either. While I was trying to figure out what to do, I heard footsteps coming from the basement. The last thing I remember is the sound of the basement door slowly opening and a shadow moving in the dark. I fled the house without looking back. I ran through the snow until I found a neighbor who called the police. They searched the house but found no one. No children, no sign of Tim or Ellie, not even the parents. To this day, the house still stands there, empty and covered in snow. And sometimes, when I pass by the street, I swear I see lights on in one of the rooms. It all started on a winter night during a work trip. I had to drive to a neighboring town for a meeting, but I underestimated the weather. The forecast warned of a snowstorm, but as usual, I thought I could handle it. The road was deserted, the kind of place where you don't see a car or a living soul for miles. The wind was so strong it made the car shake. I think my mistake was pushing the engine too hard on an incline. The car started making a strange noise and suddenly died in the middle of the road. I tried starting it multiple times, but nothing. I grabbed my phone to ask for help, but of course, there was no signal. The snow was piling up quickly, and the cold seemed to seep into my bones. As I was trying to decide what to do, I saw a faint light in the middle of the trees. It was hard to make out from a distance, but it looked like a cabin. I decided to head over there. After all, it was better than sitting in the car waiting to freeze. When I got closer, I noticed the cabin looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows were covered with a layer of ice, and the light came from a lantern hanging on the porch. I knocked hesitantly, and after a few seconds, a man opened the door. He was tall and thin, wearing simple, worn-out clothes, but what really struck me were his eyes. They were deep, like he hadn't slept in weeks, and there was something in them, something I can't describe. It wasn't fear, nor anger. It was as if he were looking right through me. "Come in, you'll freeze out here," he said, his voice emotionless. By instinct, I stepped inside. The cabin was warm, with a fire burning in the fireplace. But the place had a strange smell, a mix of mold and something sweet, almost nauseating. As he closed the door behind me, my gaze drifted to the walls. And that's when everything started to feel wrong. The walls were covered in paintings. All of them showed people, smiling faces, families hugging, individual portraits. They looked so real that it was like they were alive, watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling, but then something caught my attention. One of the paintings in the corner showed a woman I immediately recognized. She was on the cover of a newspaper I had read recently about missing people in the area. My heart raced, and then I saw it. In the center of the wall, a painting with my photo. I froze. It was me wearing the same clothes I had on that night. Before I could say anything, the man spoke behind me. "Do you like it?" I just put it up. The air seemed to vanish from my chest. I slowly turned around, and he was standing there, watching me with a subtle smile that didn't match his eyes. "You should rest," he said. "The night is long." I don't know how I managed to react. I shoved him with all my strength and ran to the door. I managed to open it, but outside was even worse than before. The wind was almost unbearable, and the snow blinded my vision. Still, I kept running. As I ran, I noticed something strange. The footprints I was leaving in the snow. There was another pair next to mine. But when I looked back, I saw no one. The footprints just disappeared halfway, as if whoever it was erasing their presence. When I reached the road, I didn't look back. I ran to my car, which miraculously started. I didn't question it. I just accelerated and drove home. I still have nightmares about that night. And the worst part is, I can't get out of my head what I saw on the way back. The figure standing by the side of the road, with those same empty eyes watching me pass. Since then, I feel like I'm being followed. And sometimes, when I look out my windows at night, I think I see someone watching me. If you're driving on a cold night and see a light in the middle of nowhere, don't stop. Keep going. No matter how desperate you are, never ever go into an abandoned cabin. I lived alone in a small apartment in the city center. A simple place, but comfortable, or at least it used to be. That year's winter was the coldest I've ever experienced. The heater in my apartment was broken, and I spent the nights huddled under piles of blankets, trying to stay warm. It wasn't the kind of cold you could simply ignore. It was the kind of cold that seemed to enter your joints and freeze your soul. One particularly frigid night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was just the wind hitting the windows, or a tree branch scratching the glass. But then the sound repeated. It was more than just the wind. Something was scraping against the window glass. I looked to the side and realized that, despite being on the 5th floor, something was out there. Fear began to take over, but I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I tried to close my eyes and go back to sleep, but the sound continued. It was relentless, scraping as if someone was trying to get my attention. The wind, if that's what it was, wouldn't make that much noise. I went to the window and slowly lifted the curtains. The sight I had made me freeze. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't a reflection of my own face. It was a figure. Something or someone was out there, watching me. I could see its eyes, deeply hollow, as if there was no life in them. The smile spreading across its face was frozen. A strange and horrible smile, as if it had been deformed by the cold. Panic took over me, and I quickly closed the curtains, unsure of what to do. But the sound didn't stop. The scraping continued, now more insistent. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore it, but it was useless. I knew something was out there, that this presence wasn't normal. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but when I opened my eyes once again, something even more disturbing awaited me. On the glass of the window, where I had previously only seen the mist from the cold, there was now a message written. The writing was fine, as if something icy had been dragged across it, and the message read, Asterisk, open the door, asterisk. The sense of terror was instantaneous. My body was paralyzed, my heart racing uncontrollably, and a wave of cold sweat ran through me. How could something have written that? There was no one outside, I knew that. But at the same time, I knew it couldn't be ignored. Something was trying to communicate with me. With my heart pounding, I began to hear another sound. Footsteps, slow, heavy, approaching the hallway. They were coming toward me. I didn't move, my mind trying to process what was happening, but nothing made sense. The door was locked. I was alone. What were those footsteps? They stopped right in front of my door. No more sound from the street, just the absolute silence of the building. But something wasn't right. I felt pressure in the air, as if I was being watched, observed from inside the house itself. My body was tense, and my breathing became shallow. I didn't know what to do, whether to hide or call the police. But then, the footsteps continued, distant, as if they were leaving. When I finally breathed a sigh of relief, I noticed something even stranger. The curtains I had closed were open again. What happened? I knew I hadn't gone over there. I knew the door was locked. I slowly got up and went to the window, hesitant. When I looked, there was nothing. The figure was gone, and the window was clear, without any signs of traces or writing. Just the cold glass, now harmless. But I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. To this day, I can't stop thinking about that frozen smile. And sometimes, on particularly quiet and cold nights, I still hear the footsteps in the hallway, and the feeling that somehow there is still something out there, waiting.